Kentucky football went out and dominated the Florida Gators this past weekend, and after seeing that performance, I believe the Wildcats can go into Athens and shock the college football world.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at Kentucky's big-time win over the 22nd ranked Florida Gators. At least they were ranked 22nd whenever the Wildcats beat them. We are also going to give you 3 reasons how Kentucky could go on the road and beat the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend. We're not predicting it to happen. Want to make it very clear. These are reasons why it could happen, not that it will. I'm going to dive into 3 of the reasons why it may happen for UK this weekend. I think Kentucky football is on the rise, and I think it is about time that we take UK seriously. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. You can make every moment more, and right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcast, would really appreciate it if you subscribed over there as well. All right, before we dive into Kentucky's 33-14 dismantling of the Florida Gators, I want to get to something that we've been trying to do every single week here, the Iowa Point Tracker. I'm going to explain it to you guys who may be watching the show for the first time. I think there's a very real chance that Kentucky plays Iowa in a bowl game for the 3rd year in a row. It's shaping up to be a very real possibility for the Wildcats. Iowa's offense is absolutely terrible. Their OC, Brian Ferentz, son of the head coach, Kirk Ferentz, currently is under contract with the Hawkeyes, where he has to make sure the team wins 7 games this season, and the team as a whole has to average 25 points per game. He was ahead of schedule 3 weeks into the year, and then after getting shut out against Penn State, he is now fallen behind. What did he do this past weekend against Michigan State? Well, he scored 26 points, and we'll pull it up here for you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Time to celebrate because Brian Ferentz has beaten the allegations. He has now scored over 100 points for the Hawkeyes, 111 to be specific, but unfortunately, that is not enough. As of right now, they're averaging 22 points per game. They need to average 25. They need to score 325 points. So, unfortunately for Brian Ferentz, they need to average almost 27 points per game for the rest of the year. Can he pull it off? We'll have to see. Get out of here, Brian. If you're watching on YouTube, you got to see the little point tracker there in the top corner. But yeah, really fun stuff that we're doing here on Locked On Kentucky. So let's dive into it. Kentucky routs Florida 33-14. This was just an absolute bludgeoning from the beginning. Kentucky went out there and did something that they've not done to an opponent in quite some time. And that's establish the running game and then lean on a team. Mark Stoops said it at SEC Media Days. He stopped actually at the end of his press conference and said, "I want to say one more thing. We as a team want to get back to," essentially what he said was, "We as a team want to get back to what we pride ourselves in, which is establishing the run game and being strong in the trenches. And we're going to try and do that this season." He wasn't asked. He wasn't told. He was told to talk about the running game. He made a point to stop before the end of the press conference to say, that's what we want to do this year. We're going to try and do that. And Ray Davis, transfer from Vanderbilt, we were expecting good things from him. I don't quite think that you and I were expecting the type of performance that he had on Saturday against the Florida Gators. If you watched the preview episode with Brandon Olson of Locked On Florida and myself, we dug into these two offenses, and honestly, I felt more confident in Florida's running game heading into this contest. Now, obviously, I really, really like Ray Davis. I like this backfield as a whole, but unfortunately, I just thought the combination of Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne was going to be good against this Kentucky front, and you were going to see Kentucky at times struggle. It was the other way around. Kentucky's rushing attack was very, very potent. This is the first time Kentucky has really leaned on a team and ran all over them in what feels like well over a year at this point. 329 rushing yards, 9.1 yards per carry for the Wildcats on 36 carries. And then, like I mentioned, Ray Davis, take a look at this stat line here. 26 carries, 280 yards. That's almost 11 yards per pop. 3 touchdowns. He also had a receiving touchdown where he just drove through defenders to get into the end zone. That was a 9-yard catch there inside the red zone. Man, oh man, oh man. The bowling ball that is Ray Davis. He currently, I believe, leads the SEC in rushing yards per game. He's one of the top 5 rushers in the entire country now after that very impressive performance. The pickup of Ray Davis has proven to be very solid for UK here over these first 5 games, because the passing offense, it looks like it still needs a little bit more time to gel and get some cohesion. Devin Leary, we're going to talk about him a little bit later in this game, didn't really have to do much for Kentucky. Also didn't really do a whole lot with his 19 pass attempts. Kentucky finished with less than 70 yards passing, but it's the running game right now for UK. And that's what Florida struggled with, and it's kind of surprising that the Gators were unable to stop Davis and were unable to stop this rushing attack as a whole. I mean, you look at Florida's rush defense numbers. I mean, they were not terrible heading into this game. In fact, I thought Kentucky's front 7 was going to struggle a little bit more and was going to have a more difficult time tackling Florida's 2 running backs. And then you go and watch this game. Ray Davis, I believe, forced 10 missed tackles on this day. Again, I don't think I can quite emphasize how special this performance was. ESPN continued to toss up this graphic throughout the game that I believe there's only over the past 20 odd years or something like that, there are only 5 different running backs that have gone for over 200 yards against Florida. May have even been 100 yards against Florida. And Ray Davis was very quickly climbed up into, I believe, that number 2 spot. And he was just 19 yards away from tying the all-time Kentucky football single-game rushing record, 299 yards, and then they pulled him at the very end of the game. Ray Davis could have gotten there. Absolutely could have. Kind of got that bowling ball style of rushing. And also, something else I want to point out here. I think that while you love the physicality and you love the ability to shed tackles from Ray Davis, you've got to see the speed. According to I can't remember what Twitter account out there tracks this, but the fastest run in college football this past weekend was Ray Davis at over 21 miles an hour once he broke into the open field on that really long touchdown run. So Kentucky has a very special player in their backfield in Ray Davis, and that's kind of where it starts for me, and it's kind of where this game ends as far as positives on the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line and Ray Davis took control of this game, and they dominated. They absolutely dominated. I want to continue to recap this game. I'm very impressed with what Ray Davis had going for him. I also want to get into a little bit more criticism for this Kentucky offense, and then this defense a little bit as well, because there may be still a little bit of cause for concern. Before I dive into that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Athletic Brewing. Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game, just like Ray Davis completely changed the game this weekend against Florida. It is the Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Ray Davis, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game because they make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste really, really good. Their brews are great tasting and award-winning and have beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. They brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, Goldens, sours, and more, and they're fit for all time, so you can drink them anytime, anywhere, and make them even more enjoyable. Let's say you're watching the big game. Let's say you're watching Georgia versus Kentucky this weekend, or if you're watching an NFL game, college basketball is about to get started here. You could take them to maybe your kid's game as well as a non-alcoholic beer. You can tackle work while sipping on one of these as well. No hangovers ever with Athletic Brewing Company. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off over at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that, again, we are free and available on all podcast platforms. So if you're watching or if you're listening there, please make sure you subscribe to the feed. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the YouTube channel. The month of October is going to be a big one. It's building up into the college basketball season. Just talking about it a second ago, we're going to have an exhibition game on the 27th. It's going to be a blast heading into this college basketball season, especially with UK, I think, back on the rise again. Also, Kentucky football is going to have an opportunity to really prove themselves here. So a lot of fun things going on here over at the Locked On Kentucky podcast. Subscribe to the show. I would appreciate it if you did that. So we talked about Ray Davis. We talked about the offensive line. Very positive things to say there. Kentucky got back to what they want to be. They just asserted themselves against this Florida front. The second thing I want to talk about here, and this is a little bit more of a criticism, Devin Leary continues to struggle. And this is what I don't really understand. He just continues to have moments where he whiffs on throws, or there feels like it's just opportunities there that Kentucky doesn't necessarily take advantage of. There was that one drop touchdown pass that he could have had, but 9 of 19 for 36 yards is typically not going to get it done against a lot of teams. The fact that you had Ray Davis to lean on is phenomenal here, but you're not going to have 280 yards and 3 tutties from your running back every single game. And you're certainly not going to get that this weekend. If you do, I am more than willing to be wrong on that. That just doesn't really seem like it's reasonable to expect Kentucky's ground game to churn out 300 rushing yards a game. You have to be able to get Devin Leary going. And obviously there have been moments this year where Kentucky's gotten him going, like against Eastern Kentucky, to throw for almost 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. The game against Akron, he played really well as well. But overall, I mean, statistically, and I'm pulling this up here for you real quick, 57.7% completion percentage. That's a second worst of his career. Outside of his freshman year at NC State, where he played 8 games, 8 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, he has really struggled, I think, to hit his targets consistently during his time with the Wildcats here. 10 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Those 5 picks, by the way, he's never thrown more than 5 interceptions in a season thus far. Of course, he's only had 1 year where he played 12 full games, so I'm not sitting here saying, oh no, he's now turnover prone. All of a sudden, it's just that he's never really had an opportunity to throw more than 5 interceptions in a season because he's not been healthy all the way through one. 1,100 yards, 8 yards per attempt. That's really good. And then his quarterback rating, or his passer rating rather, also is not too shabby at 140.7. I mean, you'll take those numbers, absolutely. I think you have to be pleased with it overall. But I feel like it could be better. And that's kind of where I want to sit with this today, is that Devin Leary didn't play phenomenal against Florida in terms of, hitting his marks and stuff like that. Obviously, the drop touchdown would have been huge for his numbers, but you want to see Kentucky execute better with him throwing the football more consistently. And I think maybe this weekend you will have to see that. It takes a really good effort from a really good quarterback to beat a really good defense and a really good team, much less on the road. So you're going to have things go right for you in the passing game, not just this week, but also in the coming weeks for this Kentucky team, because this schedule heats up immediately. This weekend is it. It's going to get very serious for the Wildcats. So Devin Leary continuing to play inconsistently is a bit of a concern. We'll continue to monitor it. He's going to have to play well with these receivers this weekend. He's got the opportunity to do so. We'll have to see if he does. All right, the final thing I want to get to here, struggles on third down did not matter for Kentucky because they were really taking advantage of things pretty consistently on first and second down. Kentucky only had 8 third downs in this game, and they were 1 of 8. They only converted 1 of them. I think it's the main reason why Florida was able to hang in this game in terms of time of possession, and they were able to hang in this game, period, because Kentucky could not stay on the field despite Ray Davis's really good rushing day. Kentucky could not keep him going with the rushing attack. Florida also as well. I mean, the concern for UK has been getting off the field themselves on third down defensively, and they were able to do it against Florida. So maybe it was kind of a little bit even there. It kind of balances out. 4 of 13 were the Gators, by the way. 1 of 3 on fourth down also was Florida. And then the other thing that I think is somewhat something that we need to be monitoring here is the fact that Kentucky, I mean, as far as completion percentage goes, they're not like impressing a ton. Graham Mertz was 25 of 30 for 244 yards in this one, 2 touchdowns, and then that one pick where Deion Walker just like flattened the receiver and the ball bounced up in the air and was picked off. But Graham Mertz going 25 of 30, and these other quarterbacks that Kentucky's defense has faced this year just kind of being able to get these passes consistently completed is not great to see. That 65% completion percentage on average for the season is good for 11th in the SEC right now, although I will also point out that Kentucky's yards per attempt at 6.3 is also tied for 5th in the SEC, so it's not like they're giving up a ton of explosive plays. It's just giving up those little dink and dunk things, and Georgia proved this past weekend against Auburn that their quick game is actually not that terrible, and also they've got a player like Brock Bowers that can really, really hurt you if you want to go quick with him. So yeah, Kentucky, I think, has their deficiencies, but that this was simply for Florida, just a matchup that the Gators could not win, especially up front. Kentucky was able to just kind of hold things in check. And then the final thing, I guess, that I'll point out here before we move on to the Georgia game, 2.4 yards per carry for Florida, 69 yards rushing, 42 for Montrell Johnson, 29 for Trevor Etienne. You held them in check on both ends, offensively and defensively. Very impressed with how the trenches played for Kentucky. You're gonna need to play. You're gonna need them to play really well this weekend, and I think that there's a chance that they do. So, how could Kentucky do this? What are the 3 reasons why Kentucky could go on the road and beat Georgia? We'll give them to you here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is really easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more on top of that. So you need to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off your NFL season. It's FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. If you've not checked out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Andy Patton and Isaac Shade, you are doing yourself a disservice. They do a great job over there breaking down. Right now, I think they're going through a lot of different conference previews throughout the college basketball landscape. I don't think you're going to find better content. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think you're going to find better college basketball content on the internet when it comes to breaking things down the way that they do in such detail, just covering the entire sport. And if you, as a Kentucky fan, are interested in learning more about the sport that Kentucky thrives in, you need to check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Again, Andy Patton, Isaac Shade. Find them on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts as well. Go give them a sub. They absolutely deserve it. All right. There are 3 reasons why I think Kentucky could go on the road and beat Georgia this weekend. And while I'm going to give you those reasons, I want to preface it by saying I don't necessarily believe Kentucky is going to go on the road and beat Georgia this weekend. I'm merely saying that there is a legitimate possibility of it happens. So for any Kentucky fans or Georgia fans that may want to take a look at this one and say, well, you're picking Kentucky to beat Georgia by 50 million. It's like, I'm not doing any of that here. I'm just giving you reasons why the Wildcats may go into Athens and upset the #1 team in the country. And let's be completely honest with ourselves. That game against Auburn, you didn't play your best game. quite frankly, Auburn didn't play their best game either. And so heading into this one in Athens, you have to be, as a Georgia fan, pretty worried. Because what did Auburn do to you? They ran the ball all over you, and that's where I want to start here. Ray Davis against Georgia's rush defense. I think as a Dogs fan, you're probably concerned. Matchup-wise, on paper, this one does not scream Georgia dominance. Now, I will say Georgia's been pretty dominant in the trenches so far throughout Kirby Smart's tenure, but you also have to give credit to the way Kentucky has really held strong. Georgia right now in the SEC is currently 6th in the conference in rush defense, averaging 113.4 yards allowed per game. Their 3.9 yards per carry allowed per game is 9th in the SEC. Also want to point out that as far as rushing attempts, Georgia is 1st in the SEC with only 28.6 rush attempts on them per game. Nobody really runs on this Georgia front. They elect to throw a lot more. Maybe it's because these early downs when teams try to throw on Georgia, they don't have or run on Georgia, they don't have a lot of success, so therefore they turn to throwing the ball because they get down. Maybe that's been the case, but whenever Auburn tried to run on Georgia, they consistently had success. Now, they also had a quarterback to help them out there. That was in Robbie Ashford. That's a dual threat and was able to do some things on the ground for the Tigers. But Kentucky has probably the best, if not one of the best running backs in the country in Ray Davis. And he really did show this past weekend alongside this offensive line that they can get a push against an SEC front. Kentucky also, if we want to talk about the rushing attack for Georgia, it's been pretty solid this year. Kentucky right now is 2nd in the SEC in rushing yards allowed per game. They average 75 allowed on the ground per contest. That's 2.54 yards per carry. You have to feel confident. You have to feel confident about Kentucky's rushing attack heading into this one. I'd like to see Kentucky find ways to get Davis not just running between the tackles every single play, but maybe trying to stretch it outside and let him show a little bit of that speed that he showed against the Gators this weekend. If Kentucky cannot get him going, I think there's going to be a little bit of a concern. We talked about Devin Leary earlier in the show about how he's not necessarily been the most consistent. He's going to need to have a really good game. He's got great receivers on the outside to throw to. Can Kentucky scheme some of those guys open, and can Devin Leary hit them consistently? I think you're going to have that if Ray Davis is not going for you. But there's opportunity for Ray Davis to really have a solid, at the least, game against the Bulldogs. I think the second thing here is creating turnovers. Kentucky right now does this almost better than anybody in the entire Southeastern Conference. According to CFBstats.com, Kentucky is 2nd in the SEC, or 3rd in the SEC in terms of total turnovers gained. They currently have a +2 turnover margin, tied with Auburn for 2nd. Arkansas is actually 1st in the SEC with a +6 turnover margin. Georgia also has a +2 turnover margin, and they have lost, I believe, 6 fumbles on the year, and they have given, they have 3 picks also on the year as well. I think Kentucky, because of their opportunistic defense and because of their ability to get some takeaways, I can see Kentucky recovering a fumble in this one, getting a tipped interception like they did against Florida. You have to realize here that you're not necessarily guaranteed turnovers, but whenever you have a streak consistently throughout the year, where you're almost halfway through the year now, where you see a team create these type of things, create turnovers, and then they're able to score off of them, you have to start to acknowledge it whenever you do pregame breakdowns, and obviously we'll talk about this later on in the week. But Kentucky, I think, has an opportunistic defense, and they have the ability to create turnovers. I think you could see it as a big thing in this game this upcoming weekend. You also got to see it again when they almost lost on the road this past weekend against Auburn. The final reason here why Kentucky may go on the road and beat the number 1 team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs. The SEC's in a down year. Kentucky plays Georgia tight. I think that's not necessarily a strong reason why Kentucky could go on the road, but I think it would be fitting based on this season, the way that it's playing out right now, if we saw something like this happen. South Carolina came into Athens, made that game very competitive until Georgia pulled away late, You got to see Georgia go on the road this past weekend, struggle against Auburn for 3.5 quarters, but Brock Bowers is your guy there at the very end. Kentucky consistently plays Georgia tight, no matter what the talent level is. We got to see last year, whenever you didn't necessarily have a great season, you got to see Kentucky really take it to Georgia. I think you made them struggle. You made them work for it. Kentucky always makes Georgia work for it. At least they have under Stoops for the past half decade or plus. You could see that again this weekend. On top of the fact that this is a weird year in the SEC, you could see this upset happen. I mean, it's not completely beyond the realm of possibility that the Wildcats go in there and they beat the Bulldogs this weekend. It's just that kind of year. It's definitely that kind of year. And we've seen Georgia play less than perfect. Who knows? Maybe they play their perfect game this weekend. I don't know. Maybe they win by 1 million. I don't know. All I'm sitting here saying is this very much so could happen. Kentucky's got the pieces to make this happen. I think they have Georgia in the right spot. If they were going to do it, this would probably be a good year to do it. So those are the reasons why I think Kentucky football could defeat the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend. If you have any thoughts on Georgia versus Kentucky this Saturday or Kentucky's win over Florida, you can leave that in the YouTube comments below. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave all of those in the YouTube comments below. I'll see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.